Hi, my name is Selale Tuzel. I'm an associate professor of finance and business economics at the Marshall School of Business at USC. I'll talk about our research with my colleague Ben Jung on the employment effects of investment tax incentives. There's a long history of legislators being interested in developing policies that promote growth. These policies usually take the form of investment tax incentives, usually by allowing businesses and individuals to deduct a certain percentage of investment costs from their taxes. The policies make investment cheaper and therefore encourages business investment, but the stated intent of the policies almost always include promoting job growth. Here's a list of the major federal laws since 2000 that provide investment tax incentives. If you pay attention to the title of the laws, the titles usually include words like jobs or job creation, emphasizing that they're really trying to promote job growth. Starting in 2002 with the Job Creation and Worker Assistance Act, and most recently we had the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, lawmakers from both sides of the aisle passed laws that provide incentives to make investments with the ultimate goal of creating jobs. But do these investment incentives ultimately have an impact on the labor market and increase employment? These are the two questions we are seeking to answer in our research. We find that the incentives did not have a material effect on total employment, but that's not the whole story. And we find that the incentives actually had a profound impact on the labor market. Before we go further into telling you about our findings, so let's see where the notion of creating jobs through investment incentives come from. Firms use both capital and labor to produce their output. When capital and labor complement each other, meaning they increase the productivity of each other, cheaper investment fuels new investment and makes labor more productive. This in turn increases the output of the firm and its demand for labor. It pushes the wages up. So, in this simple framework where the firm's capital and labor inputs complement each other, investment tax incentives lead to higher employment and higher wages. But this simple framework may be a little too simple. What if there are multiple types of labor in the economy who perform different tasks and have different skills? Let's take a manufacturing firm with an assembly line and engineers, and let's say this firm takes the investment incentives and installs robotic arms to its assembly line. Robotic arms will not have the same effect on both types of labor, assemblers and engineers. They will make some of the assembly workers obsolete and replace them, but at the same time, they will increase the demand for engineers to program and maintain the robots. In this case, the overall impact on firms' employment is not clear. It could go up, it could go down, or not change at all. But this asymmetric impact on engineers and assembly workers will have a significant effect on the firm's labor composition. This idea is well known to labor economists. Economists previously categorized jobs in two dimensions. The first dimension is the skill level required to perform a job. We can measure skill either by education level or the experience necessary to complete these tasks. For example, an engineering or managerial position would be a skilled job. The second dimension is whether a job requires procedural, repetitive, in other words, routine tasks. Economists call these jobs routine task jobs. An assembler or a cashier would be as examples for routine task jobs. Technologically advanced capital goods, such as robotic arms or self-checkout machines at retail stores, tend to automate the routine task jobs and replace routine task labor, but at the same time, they require more skilled labor. Finally, there are some jobs that do not require a skilled workforce, but require manual, non-routine tasks, such as janitorial jobs. These jobs are not directly affected by investment in technology, or at least not yet. So, how does the investment tax incentive work? The tax incentive we're studying is called the Section 179 and it targets small firms. When businesses make an equipment purchase, normally they're allowed to deduct the cost of this purchase from their tax returns over time following a depreciation schedule. This deduction is called the depreciation deduction. Typically, the deduction works out to a certain percentage of the price of equipment each year. For example, computers are depreciated over 5 years. But Section 179 of the Federal Tax Code allows eligible businesses to take out all of that deduction up front in the year that the equipment is purchased rather than staggering it out over time. To use a $250,000 computer purchase as an example, without Section 179, a business purchasing those computers would deduct $250,000 over a period of 5 years. $50,000 immediately, $80,000 next year, another 50,000 in the following year, and so on. But with Section 179, an eligible business can deduct the full $250,000 purchase price right away. This immediacy of the deduction makes the investment much more attractive to eligible businesses. When we try to understand the effect of investment tax incentives, like Section 179, on employment, a big challenge is distinguishing between correlation and causation. Changes in employment may be correlated with the availability of investment incentives for many different reasons. The bills that provided the investment tax incentives, like the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, are usually hundreds of pages long, and they have many provisions that might be affecting employment. Also, there may be some trends in the economy that are both affecting employment and influencing the legislative agenda at the same time. In that case, both the employment and the laws would be responding to the same underlying cause. So we have to make sure that we're not just interpreting a simple correlation between the laws and the employment changes as the causal effect of investment incentives. To deal with this important issue, we take advantage of a natural experiment, an event that helps us to create a comparison environment where everything besides the investment tax incentives are identical, so we can isolate the effect of incentives on employment. Let me tell you a little about that environment. Section 179 of the Federal Tax Code has been around for a long time. This is not a new law. But its investment limits were very low before 2003, so low that only the tiniest firms were actually eligible for the benefit. Also, since the cost of the bill to the taxpayers was not substantial at that point, all states allowed the same deductions from state taxes as well. So, eligible firms all over the US could take immediate deductions both from their federal and their state tax returns. In 2003, President Bush signed the Jobs and Growth Tax Relief Reconciliation Act. This law increased the Section 179 investment limit from $25,000 to $100,000. At that point, some states opted in and pegged their deduction limits to federal limits, but others opted out. In other words, deduction from state tax returns continued for some states, like Oregon, but ended for others, like my home state of California. Subsequent laws increased the federal Section 179 investment limits further, first to $125,000 in 2007, then to $250,000 in 2008, and to $500,000 in 2010. This led to increasingly large differences in investment incentives between states that adopted the federal incentive and the states that did not. So, in addition to the differences across states, even in states that opted in, only firms that invest within the Section 179 investment limits benefit from the incentive. This makes large firms effectively ineligible for the incentive. We use all these institutional details to isolate the effect of the investment incentives. We do this by comparing the outcomes before and after the tax incentive, across states that opted in and out for state taxes, and between firms that are eligible and not eligible for the benefit due to their sizes relative to the incentive limits. So, what do we find? Do investment incentives lead to higher employment? If they do, we should find that firms eligible for Section 179 in states that adopted the federal incentive should have higher employment growth compared to all the other control groups. To do this, we use very detailed establishment level data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, or BLS for short, but we find no effect on total employment. But that's not the end of the story. The BLS collects detailed occupational data, so an advantage of using the BLS data is that it allows us to go deeper into the establishment and look at the occupational outcomes beyond total employment. That's what we do next. When we look into routine task jobs, jobs that are rule-based and are prone to replacement from automation, we actually find a strong negative effect of investment incentives. When investment incentives reduce the effective cost of investing by 1%, routine task jobs go down by 1.4%, consistent with the predictions of labor economists. This is obviously in contrast to the stated goal of these laws. Fortunately, the steep decline in routine task jobs are partially compensated by an increase in skilled employment. A 1% decline in the cost of investing leads to about 1.5% increase in skilled employment in eligible businesses. We also have some interesting findings about the timing of these labor changes. Firms need skilled labor quickly after they make the investments. They need people to operate and maintain the equipment they just purchased, so they hire skilled labor quickly. The decline in routine labor comes with a slight delay. This means that they make reductions in this group of employees after they make sure that the new system is up and running. The insignificant response of total employment at first gives the impression that investment incentives don't matter for employment. They neither help nor hurt, but that's not true at all. These policies have an important impact on individual workers' job prospects. They may also be contributing to the job polarization we have been seeing in the past few decades. Labor economists have shown that job opportunities have shifted away from middle skill routine jobs towards high and low skill jobs. There are many reasons behind job polarization, such as offshoring of jobs and advancement in technology. But investment incentives might be expediting the technology adoption and contributing to this polarization that we see. So, policymakers should be mindful of such heterogeneous effects, and maybe they should consider combining these policies with other training programs that can help displaced employees gain necessary skills to make them competitive in the labor market again. And finally, there is the cost issue. Investment incentives that allow immediate depreciation have non trivial costs to the taxpayers. The Congressional Budget Office estimates that these provisions in the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017 will increase federal budget deficit by $174 billion over the 2020-29 budget window. This is a significant sum. Of course, there can be arguments for encouraging investment. One such argument is that investment incentives could spur growth at investment good producers. Another, maybe better argument can be built around the benefits of being at the frontier of innovation. But our findings suggest that the arguments for investment incentives should not include promoting employment because they don't. Thank you very much for listening to my talk. You can find more about our project with Ben and our other research projects on our USC websites. Have a great day and fight on.